I am here today to talk to you about the global epidemic, the international scourge of human trafficking. And this is a subject that we train on for days at a time. And if we had a class, we could probably spend all semester or even an academic year studying this issue. But I have 18 minutes today and even less right now. And I'm at a severe disadvantage. Why? Because first, I'm a lawyer. Second, I'm a public official, neither of which is known for brevity when it comes to public speaking. So what I'd like to do right off the bat is give you the thesis of my remarks today. So if I run out of time at the end, at least we have a clear picture of what I want to communicate. Consistent with the theme of today's TED event, which is lift. We must, as a global community, lift our voices collectively to educate people and to raise awareness about this horrible epidemic of trafficking. We must lift our standards in terms of passing laws and corporate policies to attack and eradicate this evil. We must lift one another in the fight against trafficking in all of its forms. And most critically, we must lift our fellow human beings out of the clutches of traffickers, out of the bondage of modern-day slavery. And once they are liberated, we must give them the resources and the support they need and empower them so that they can lift themselves towards healing and making themselves whole again. Now, let me give you a quick working definition of trafficking. This is a commonly accepted one throughout the globe, and that is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or acceptance of a person or persons by an unlawful means, so force, fraud, coercion, or abduction for an unlawful purpose. For instance, forced labor, sexual exploitation. Now, what are the other forms of trafficking? I've talked about two of them, and forced labor, sexual exploitation make up the vast majority of trafficking cases. Again, when I'm talking about forced labor, I'm talking about horrific circumstances, people put in life-threatening situations, isolated from their families, paid little or nothing. We're talking about sexual exploitations, about being prostituted out, raped, beaten, abused, tortured, or made subjects of pornography. But there are also other horrible manifestations. There's a black market for illegal adoptions for little babies around the world. There's a black market for human organs, so harvesting organs, extracting them from humans, live, sometimes recently killed, to sell in the black market. Now, UNICEF says there are 300,000 children right now worldwide who've been conscripted into military service for warlords or for militia. And we know that terrorists around the world are buying up little children, strapping suicide bombs to them and sending them into enemy encampments for hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands. All of these different forms of trafficking exist, yet most people ask, really? Isn't that just isolated? Does trafficking really exist in large numbers? And let me tell you today, ladies and gentlemen, trafficking is at its greatest number in the history of all of the world. Depending on the agency, International Labor Organization says 21 million modern-day slaves. Global Slavery Index says 46 million. It really doesn't matter exactly how many the numbers are because we have never seen trafficking in the numbers that we see today. And let me be clear about this because I'm going to give it an analogy or an example, and in no way am I trying to minimize the blight that the transatlantic slave trade was on our world's history or even our national history. But over the 340 years of that evil institution, by all scholarly accounts, 12.5 to 13 million people were trafficked. And again, when I'm talking about today, UNICEF says that just in the last 30 years, their estimates are 30 million little children have been trafficked for sex exploitation. So when we read in our history books and it says trafficking has ended, don't believe it. That's a myth. Most Americans believe that slavery ended with the Emancipation Proclamation, the ratification of the 13th Amendment. That is not true. Slavery exists today in all the forms that I've talked about. Why is it growing? And is it growing? Some people say, well, is it diminishing? No, in fact, it is growing at a record pace. Right now, human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal enterprise internationally. It is the second most lucrative. It's already leapfrogged arms dealing and counterfeiting. It trails only drug trafficking, and in reality, we don't know. It may have already surpassed that. The traffickers don't respond to our survey monkey, so it's really hard to get real-time information from them. But I believe that sex trafficking, that human trafficking has already eclipsed drug trafficking. Why? Because historically we've put so many resources towards the war on drugs. It was a good thing in many ways. But traffickers, no, there's a lot of heat on that side. High risk, not as much reward. With human trafficking, they say you can sell drugs only once, but you can sell a little girl or boy time and time again, hundreds of times, thousands of times. I testified with one young lady who said she was trafficked out to 40,000 different men. This was before our United States Congress. That is how heinous this is. And so trafficking continues to grow in numbers. Other reasons I believe pornography and the access to the internet. Some organizations say that 76% of sex with underage girls starts with internet contact. There's a wonderful organization started right here in Cache Valley called Fight the New Drug that does incredible work trying to educate the world about the perils of pornography and how that leads to trafficking, both with traffickers and the Johns who create the demand for this. And how sad is it that Americans are 70% or 80%, the vast majority of the demand for trafficking. So why don't more people talk about this? Why don't more people know? Well, in truth, I didn't know until I became Attorney General much about trafficking. I'd seen the movie Taken. But I got a call shortly into my tenure by a friend who said that he had a friend who had a son, and he believed that his son was being sexually abused and trafficked by an international narco trafficker, a drug trafficker from Central America who was living in a suburb of Salt Lake City, had a predilection to little boys, had been prosecuted in his own country for child offenses. But now he was in a suburb of Salt Lake, and is there anything that we could do? We investigated. In fact, this very brave soul, and if I have something that I leave with you, it's always report. If you suspect something, if your spidey sense tingles, call us in law enforcement. We would rather investigate 10 cases and have them not turn out to be anything than to miss one case like this. We wired this individual up. He was very brave. He helped us get the evidence we needed to arrest an individual named Victor Rax. Now, Rax had reputedly slaughtered his own mother in his own country. Very bad individual who was abusing little boys and forcing them to mule his drugs, not just into high schools and junior high schools, but elementary schools throughout Utah. We had found out from other law enforcement agencies that he had been arrested multiple times before, but he had been deported 7 different times. This was his 8th time back in the state. And so this time we asked our federal counterparts, please defer deportation. Let us prosecute him under Utah law, under the U.S. criminal justice system, so we can put him away forever and a day, and he will never terrorize our schools and our children and our neighborhoods again. And fortunately, they cooperated with us, and by the time we filed our information, our charging documents, whereas before there had never been a witness willing to come forward, we now had 30 to 40 witnesses, victims who were willing to come and testify against him. And we estimated that there were countless more victims, many, many times that, maybe over 100. Over a 15-year period that he'd abused. Now, feeling the weight of all that evidence during the pendency of the trial, Mr. Rax took his life, hung himself, and while many of the victims were perplexed about that and distraught because they wanted to confront their accuser, we told them that it was a good thing. He would never come back to haunt them, and the judge allowed them time to tell their story and start to heal. It was cathartic. That Rax case opened my eyes. The trafficking can happen right here in a very quiet, wonderful state like Utah. And about that time, I met an individual named Tim Ballard who started an organization called Operation Underground Railroad. He was a former Homeland Security agent, and he had amassed a group of former CIA agents and FBI agents, former Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, who came and dedicated their lives, left their professions and their badges and the comfort of their pensions to start a nonprofit organization to work with countries around the world. And in one particular case, the country of Colombia, leaders there called Tim Ballard and said, Tim, would you please come help us set up a trafficking sting? Because we believe that dozens of little girls have been snatched up. They were using traffickers, a former Miss Cartagena, to entice these little girls and tell their families that they were going to come and make a lot of money in a modeling academy. And there were dozens and dozens of these precious little girls who were being pimped out and sold to Americans who traveled down for cheap sex in places like Cartagena. You couldn't walk off the plane or walk onto the beach in Cartagena without people coming up to you saying, "You want to buy a little girl? You want to buy a little boy? A little bit more if they're a virgin?" You can order them up to your room like a slice of pizza. Just appalling. Well, Tim agreed to set up an operation, a sting. We actually used a friend of mine that I introduced to OUR. He's a very prominent businessman, and we called him the El Jefe because he went in and posed as a sex buyer to set up a large sex party. But he wanted to make sure that they didn't bring just the older 14 to 18-year-old girls, that they brought the younger girls that they had been grooming, 11, 12 years old, raping them, drugging them, beating them until they were pliant and would do whatever the traffickers said. So we set up an elaborate sting, sent our friend down into Colombia to set this all up. And then Tim invited me to come, and it was October right before an election, and I didn't want to be a distraction, but I wanted to go so badly. I said, "Tim, let me pray." I prayed, felt that God really wanted me to be a part of this and open my eyes and see. I also was praying for divine intervention when I told my wife what I was going to do. She agreed. We went down. On a Friday, we trained all day, did op prep with their local Coast Guard, their FBI in Colombia, and local law enforcement and their child and family services agents, because OUR won't go into a country until they dedicate all of the resources they have to recovery, rehabilitation, and giving these children their lives back once they've been liberated. We found out through intel that there were splinter cells of this same ring, and we wanted to take all of the traffickers down at the same time and free all of the children. And so we did a simultaneous operation in 3 different cities. We posed as sex buyers. I got to play the role of the bodyguard for El Jefe. I was La Sombra, the shadow, because I can speak Spanish, and I guess I'm ugly and menacing. And on a Saturday, we had rented out an island. The traffickers brought more than 50 young boys and girls, ostensibly to have a sex party with us. We segregated them away in a cabana. We sat at the table with the traffickers. They brought drugs and told us all the horrible stories that we could do to these little kids. In exchange, we brought a significant amount of money. We had 20 contour cameras hidden so that we could gather the evidence we need. Pen light cameras, backpack cameras, a drone with a camera. We also were recording that because a gentleman named Jerry Mullen, a great producer, some of you may have seen some of his movies like Schindler's List, Rain Man, Jurassic Park. He said that when we made Schindler's List, my one regret, he and Steven Spielberg, was that we couldn't make that movie 50 years before and actually stop the atrocities as they were taking place. And so now he wanted to create a film to wake people up, to lift our voices. It's been released. It's called The Abolitionists. I hope that you get a chance to go see that. But we sat there with the traffickers. We exchanged the money and the promises. And then we were arrested by local law enforcement along with the bad guys. They processed them, took them off the island for prosecution. They unshackled us, let us go, and we jumped on planes and headed back to the States. Now, before we did that, the beautiful thing for me, the life-altering, the transformational experience was watching these little girls. And sometimes they don't know that OUR are the good guys. But this time they told them, they said, the Americans came to liberate you and take you back to your families. And they were crying. And they were saying, we love you, America. God bless America. And they were singing songs. And that moved my heart so much that I committed that no matter what I ever did in life, no matter where I went, that I would try to eradicate this horror of sex trafficking, especially with little children. And so with that one experience coming back, with my eyes open now, and we made sure that these children, after they were liberated, went back to safe home environments. And if the home environment wasn't safe, that they got the resources, again, that they needed, next of kin. We've kept in touch with them, and they're doing well, and they're recovering, they're resilient. But this really, again, awakened me to the reality of trafficking, that yes, it does happen in far-flung third world countries, but it also happens here in the United States. And one of the reasons why I'm such a believer in organizations like Operation Underground Railroad or International Justice Mission or Polaris Project, so many. We have Backyard Broadcast right here in our state, Fight the New Drug, wonderful organizations that address trafficking domestically and internationally, because I truly believe that if we had had an OUR 10 or 15 years ago in Central America doing what they do today, in dozens of countries around the world, we would never have had a Victor Rax to come and torment and terrorize the kids and the families of our community. So what can we do together, ladies and gentlemen? Again, we must lift our voices. We must elevate this discussion, because truly, fighting against trafficking is not a political issue. It's not a Democrat issue or a Republican issue. It is a humanitarian issue. All of these children, whether they're American kids or not, are our kids. And we need everyone all working together. There's enough to divide us in politics. Trust me, I know. This is one place where we can all come together, because no one's for trafficking except the traffickers and the Johns. And if there is one little silver lining in all of this, it's that we can unite and come together. Now, people say all the time, can you really make a difference? Can you really change things? I want to give you a little epilogue to that one story about Cartagena. Yes, we were very successful. In one day, it was a record number. Between those three cities, we took home 121 little kids, and that was marvelous. But the magic for me happened because we trained local law enforcement, gave them the resources and technology that they need to be empowered. And they did operation after operation afterwards, so much so that 6 months later, OUR tried to go back down to Carta, and they couldn't find a single person to sell them a little kid for sex. They kept saying, well, there's Americans that got arrested, not realizing it was OUR. And everybody who sold children or tried to sell them, they've all been arrested. You can't buy kids for sex here anymore in Cartagena. If we can do that, ladies and gentlemen, in 6 months in Carta, well, guess what? Cali and Bogota have followed along. If we can do that throughout Colombia, then we can do it in Thailand, we can do it in the Philippines, we can do it in Africa, we can do it anywhere. And that is the magic and power of working together, lifting again our voices, lifting our leaders and legislators to make better laws, lifting law enforcement so they're empowered to do their jobs, so that finally we can lift our fellow beings out of the clutches of trafficking. We can make a difference. I know you here at Utah State have a saying, I believe that we will win. I hear that chant. It is ominous when you're coming in as an opposing team, but it is beautiful, it's thunderous, and it is inspiring when you're on the same side. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that we will win this fight. Let us lift together. God bless you and have a great day.